Jeff Joniak, voice of the Bears, in year 25 behind the mic for the Chicago Bears. Jeff, I'm going to start with what I read about actually a failure of yours before broadcasting. I'm going to quote my colleague, Dan Wiederer, mutual friend of ours, the Chicago Tribune. Joniak's hyperactive zeal has become a calling card. Ironic, he jokes, given that once upon a time in early adulthood, he was rejected for a job with a prominent pizza franchise because, as he was told, he was, quote, just not enthusiastic enough for Domino's. All right, Jeff, what happened?
That is an accurate description, exact quote. You're sorry, you're not enthusiastic enough. It was down in South Florida. I left my job at Sports Phone to be with my future wife. And I was trying to find a job in the mid-'80s. Obviously, as I look back, the recession was going on, so finding a radio or TV job was tough. In fact, West Palm Beach Television said I was overqualified. That's another one. But I didn't even have any TV experience, so I don't know how I could be overqualified. That was a nice way of saying no. But yeah, I was just trying to pick up odd jobs. I delivered flowers for a funeral home. I was doing anything I could. And I applied at Domino's, man, to deliver pizza. And this spunky little gal said, so tell me about yourself, and da-da-da-da-da. And, I'm a college graduate from Iowa State. And in the end, the interview ended with, yeah, you're just not enthusiastic enough. Thanks for coming in. So fast forward, I'm emceeing an event for a North Shore Prep and Willows Academy that Virginia and McCaskey had asked me to MC, raise money for inner city kids, very prominent schools in the North Shore, very, very strong education, very, very good place. And they had I was always the MC of these fundraisers, and one of them was the man who started Domino's. And I had to introduce him. He was the guest speaker, and I said to the crowd, I said, yeah, I didn't make the cut at Domino's. I wasn't enthusiastic enough. Who has heard my broadcast here? And everybody was like nervous energy, and he wasn't laughing. He wasn't laughing. But that was my Domino's story. How about that one?
How about that?
That's one of many failures, though. Many failures.
Well, we can talk we can talk about as many as you want, but let's start at the beginning. A young Jeff Joniak, when and how did sports broadcasting, just the idea of it, kind of pop in your head?
It never did. It never did until I went to school to be a meteorologist. Now, I'm going to go backwards before I go forward, and everybody's heard this story already, but I loved sports, loved it. And I always was taping sports on a tape recorder. And I know I was screwing around with a tape recorder from the time I was a little kid. I remember getting one for Christmas, and I was, going into conversations and repeating what announcers would say on the radio or television. But not one time, Kevin, did I ever even consider doing this, because from the time I was in second grade, I wanted to be a meteorologist, a weatherman, not on TV, but chasing hurricanes and stuff. I was fascinated with weather from the time I was in second grade. In Cleveland, 4th of July, 1969, there was a tornado that was coming through the east side of Cleveland, Lakewood, Ohio, and I lived just out in the outskirts of that, and I was scared to death. I remember my dad say, we're going to go watch the fireworks, and the wind blew the screen door off the back of our house. And so, again, I was second grade, so I remember hiding under a pool table in the basement. And then immediately when everything passed, didn't hit my neighborhood, but hit my grandpa's house. And I remember watching, you're going to laugh, but the weatherman at that time was Wally Canaan, the weatherman. And I loved him. And I started watching the weather, and always nervous on the 4th of July. To this day, that really made an impact on me. So I handpicked Iowa State, and I ran into something called Calculus 101. F had a C going into the final on the third crack at it. First semester of my sophomore year. I can't do story problems, 20 story problems, turned it in blank. and went back to the dorm, burned the book in my garbage can outside Buchanan Hall, and that was a wrap. And then hoped my dad would allow me to go back to college because my GPA was in the can, so to speak. And I said, I just want to go, I want to write. I just picked it out of the air, and I went into journalism, and that's how it started.
Do you remember the first game you ever called?
Yeah, it was a baseball game. Interestingly, I don't know against who. It was on the Iowa. I tried to walk out of the Iowa State baseball team, so that lasted 2 hours, and couldn't hit, couldn't run, couldn't bat, but I tried. And Larry Corrigan was the manager, later to become a Cub Scout, and I remember asking if I could call the game, one of the baseball games in the spring of my sophomore year. And so just set up a table behind home plate with my college roommate, Scott DeMel, who was a landscape architect, but we were both baseball players at Hersey High School. And yeah, that was my very first game. And I loved it. Loved it.
What did you love about it? I mean, do you remember just some of the things that drew you in, that like you were hooked?
I always loved play-by-play on the radio as a kid. Transistor under the radio or under the pillow. And so, I would scan the dial for everything from American Hockey League in Nova Scotia to the Providence Aces to, old baseball games, listening to, for some reason, I was listening to a lot of hockey, St. Louis, whatever. And then, I used to tape all these announcers on my tape recorder off the scratchy radio. So, but I love sports, passionate about sports. And I just didn't really realize at that time in 1981 that I could possibly do this for a career, because we had a journalism program, and on the campus there was a TV station and a student radio station. So the day I went to journalism department, Tom Beal was the head of the department, this little short bald guy with glasses, and he pulled him down to the edge of the nose, looked at my transcripts and said, "What makes you think you're going to be any better at this?" I said, "You're going to have to trust me." And the next day, I'm breaking down the NFC Championship game on the student radio when Clark, from Montana to Clark. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what I could do. So yeah, I just kind of started. And then the next year I became sports director the first semester of my junior year, and I started calling everything: basketball, football, hockey at midnight, 10 o'clock maybe, midnight, with no names on the jerseys, freezing my tail off in the rink. It was just, I really, really fell in love with it. I really did.
What was your first job out of college?
Sports phone, 976-1313, sports phone extra, 976-2525. Hit the lottery numbers on 97, whatever the case may be. But yeah, I went to the Loyola Radio conference. This used to be a thing back in the day. And all the radio and TV announcers of that time were, giving us advice, and there were seminars. And so I remember Clark Weber. Remember Clark Weber? Oh, you're young. He was on, he was a big time jock, and then somewhat talk show host, WIND, I think, at the time, but he was legendary. And I remember being in a big auditorium at Loyola's campus, and it seemed big to me at the time. I don't know, maybe it wasn't, but he goes, look in front of you, look behind you, look to your right, look to your left. Only one of you will be in this business 10 years from now, or something to that effect. And I'm like, wow, this is going to be competitive. And he wasn't wrong. And anyway, so I also met a gentleman by the name of Chris Madsen. Chris Madsen was a local sportscaster here, and he was the general manager of Sports Phone. So I took his number, and by my senior year wasn't even over yet. First semester, I had to stay 4.5 years, so it was December of '84 is when I graduated Iowa State, and they hired me right away. And the first person I met there was Lou Canellis. He was leaning back in a chair with a Fu Manchu mustache, hand to God, and introduced me, to one another. And he wanted to know if I'm a go out kind of guy. That's the first question. Not where you from. Hey, do you go out? You like going out? And Fred Hubner was my first boss. But So it was just, Chris Bowden was there, Dave Wills was there, the former voice of the Tampa Bay Rays, and worked on the White Sox. A lot of great people at Sports Phone, and we were just a bunch of big recent college graduates that love sports and did updates every 10 minutes for 59.7 seconds every 10 minutes. So we didn't get paid very much, but it sure was fun.
Do you remember what time your shifts were?
All over the place.
Oh.
I mean, if you got the day shift, Chris Bowden was the guy, and then became Dave Wills. They were the guys. They were the dudes. So you had basically their version of morning drive, 9 to 5. And I worked overnights. I slept on the floor. We had at least once or twice a month we had to sleep on the floor at Sports Phone, and because they had all kinds of programs, horse racing, lottery numbers, horoscopes, and you had to download them. And you had to make sure. And it was just, I remember the ticking sound of just the clicks of people calling into this stuff in a room that you had to, it was just, I mean, everybody had you drew a short straw some months, you did more than others, but yeah, we had to do all that. And I remember the first assignment I had was DePaul, Eastern Washington, when DePaul was good. And, in Rosemont. And that was a big deal. I remember typing out every single word because I had to do like a 30-second preview or whatever, including my name. And then I remember going to Wrigley. That was the other thing. Fred Hubner would make all the assignments, and it would be listed once a month, and you got an extra $20 if you got to cover a game. And seniority ring, and so if you got one a month, it was going to be a big deal that you get to go out and go to a game and cover the game. And I remember picking up a couple baseball games at Wrigley, and this is my first year in sports, sir, 40 years ago. And I dressed up, coat and tie, going to the Wrigley press box, and everybody's looking at me like, what are you doing? There's, hot dog stains and mustard. What are you doing? And I just thought it was important to dress up, and George Hoffman was there and all the right, and I was intimidated, man. There's a guy named Pat Benkowski. I don't know if you remember him.
Mm-hmm.
He was in there, and it was just feared going into the baseball clubhouses back then. Those managers were nasty and mean, but yeah, that's where it all went down.
I'm old enough to remember these reports that the radio reporters would file. But for those who are maybe younger, I mean, what did that entail? If your assignment is go to a Cubs game, like what are you doing? Kind of what's going to
tape? Yeah, you're getting you're taping interviews and they're cutting it up, and they use it on Sports Phone Extra. So it'd be more like a 60-second wrap, as we call it. So you write a little bit, put that soundbite in, and join us at in an hour. We'll have another one type of thing. And then at Sports Phone, the main number, it was basically, let's be honest, gamblers would call in to make sure, because there was no internet, there was no, the late scores weren't in the newspaper. So especially during college football, I mean, you're trying to jam as many scores in as possible. And they would, hey, you forgot one. They'd call, they had the number to the, and so you'd get on a conference call with New York and Detroit. And there was a guy named Howie Carpin most of the time and he's still doing Sirius XM updates, believe it or not, 40 years later. And he was kind of the ringleader. They had the AP wire, so they had the ticker. And so you'd have to write this stuff down, saying, Cubs 5, Rangers, whatever the case may be, the basketball scores, DePaul 82, Western Michigan at 61, and you're scribbling all this out. This is not being recorded. You have a pencil. You set up your board for the day, and you're writing all these scores. Every 8 minutes you get on this, and every 10 minutes you go on the air. And it was, intense, honestly, because it's just nonstop. The day flew by. I mean, when games are going on, that was when games were going on. During the day, you do it, not every 10 minutes, every half hour, you just do updates. So before there was anything, like, the internet, or long before the internet, that's what we did. I used to call it up as a kid. My dad would get mad at me because of toll calls on the phone. What are you doing? Taking out of your allowance, although I didn't get an allowance. But yeah, I looked at the guys on Sports Phone as like stars. There was not sports talk radio yet. There were talk shows and things like that. And WBBM was, gosh, you dreamed of one day working at a WGN or WBBM. And, man, in the old days, man, radio was outstanding back in those days. They had money to burn.
The first newspapers.com reference of Jeff Joniak came on June 15th, 1990. And you were actually the second note in this headline. Note number one is that Chris Collinsworth signed a 3-year contract with HBO Sports. And then the second note, Jeff Joniak has been named sports director for the Illinois News Network, replacing Chris Bowden, who has joined WBBM Radio. Now, I think there's like a 5-year gap here, so kind of choose your own adventure. The important parts of your career journey, if you want to, I don't know how you want to get to this or what, what's in, what kind of, just from your perspective, like the important moments to get to that point.
Well, sports phone, so I quit sports phone after a year to go down to Florida to be with what was going to be my future wife. And when it didn't work out down there job-wise, sports phone hired me back, thankfully. I mean, all those guys were at my wedding, honestly, in Pennsylvania. It was a great group of guys that still I'm not as close to them and talking to them as I used to be, but and then I started doing color with Brian Wheeler, the late Brian Wheeler, who became the voice of the Portland Trail Blazers, legendary out there. And I was doing color for Loyola basketball, and so just picking up stuff like that. And then the Illinois Radio Network, I started doing at Tribune. So it was a Tribune company at the time. And Tribune, on the weekends, I'd go in there and I did sports first thing in the morning on Saturday. And it was a state network, okay? Tribune Radio Network. And I slept on the floor. This became a theme, by the way. I slept on the floor there as well. And there was a gentleman by the name of Chris Bly. He was a lifelong friend. He's now a TV salesman, doing quite well in San Diego. And he was the producer and I was the sportscaster. So was Chris Bowden. Chris kind of got me in there. And then when Chris left Illinois, it became Illinois Radio Network. It was bought by another company. I came into that position. And that was also great timing because you say that was 1990, right? So
yep.
1991, the Illinois Radio Network became the network flagship for the Chicago Bulls radio. So it was just the state network stations, affiliates. But we did a pre- and post-game show. It was me and Ray Liotta's nephew, Tony. Nice kid. Nice guy. I've run into him a couple times. It was just he and I. And we did all this stuff. And the Bulls were kind enough at that time to even put after games. We had Jimmy Clemens, Jimmy Rogers, Johnny Bach. They would call us from the locker room on the phone, and we would interview them. Just insane. So this is the year, right? They tear it up. They go to the finals, and so they sent me to L.A. for the finals. And Brian Wheeler was not working with us, but I needed somebody. Tony stayed back at the station, and I needed somebody to help me, and he was a huge Lakers fan. He was a Chick Hearn fan from way back. And I get there, and Brian McIntyre is a Chicago guy who became the head media relations person for the NBA. Great guy. Everybody loved McIntyre. I get to the LA Forum for game one. Now, again, we're the network. It's Jim Durham, Johnny Kerr, and Chet Kopic was for the flagship here in Chicago. So I don't see a seat there on courtside for me, and so I go to Mr. McIntyre. Mr. McIntyre, there's no seat for me. Well, who are you? What are you doing? I go, I'm credentialed, but I don't have a seat. No one told me. So they put us in the very last row of the LA Forum, and I was broadcasting pregame from there. So make a long story short, Brian was there because if they were to win the championship, I got to cover the locker room. Again, we're a two-man band there. So Brian did the postgame from the last row of the LA Forum, and I went into the locker room. And I remember Mark Giangreco was at the front of the line with me, and he goes, here comes the Reverend Jesse Jackson and his people and the security. And so they were, make way for Reverend Jackson. And so Mark goes, don't budge. We're getting in here. Well, these guys, it's getting physical. And I remember one of the security guys, do you know who we are? I go, I got a job to do. So what I did, I crawled on my hands and knees underneath people's legs into the locker room during the celebration of the LA Forum. And James Jordan, I developed a friendship with him. He liked me. We didn't have wireless equipment back then. So he protected the area where I was to be set up, and he was bringing me players. I didn't get Michael, but I just can't believe we pulled it off. We won AP Sportscast of the Year for that. I remember that. That was probably my very first acknowledgement of some award of some sort for that broadcast. I couldn't believe it to this day. You talk about just a miracle. Oh, wow.
Throughout this time, and you're kind of, I don't want to fast forward too much, but you're
It's 40 years. We're not going to cover 40 years, Kevin.
We're done, because we're just talking about how you break in, and I believe it was 6 years later, you became the sports director of WMAQ 670 AM, and throughout this time, you're the sports director. You're doing sports reports, but you're not doing play-by-play, which is obviously what you've done for 25 years. I mean, throughout this time, are you thinking about it? I know you mentioned you're doing the color commentary for Loyola. You're grabbing stuff here and there. Like, where is this in your purview throughout these, kind of like, decade in Chicago, decade plus in Chicago radio?
Well, I was so totally absorbed in the Bulls, and Lou Canellis, one of my dear friends in this business, he really. So Lou was working Sports Channel sidelines. And so I helped him out in pregame. He was pregame host of the radio network, but I was doing pregame with him, doing interviews, locker, whatever. And then I would do halftime and postgame on the radio for WMAQ. And he would do Sports Channel, and he became enormously popular for it. And I didn't get paid a dime. I did it for free. I volunteered, and I did it those years that they had the games. And again, I would work morning drive, okay, get in at 3 o'clock in the morning, whatever. And then if we had a game at home, I didn't go on the road, but if we had a game at home, I would leave MAQ, sleep at Lou's house on the floor, and then take a nap, and then go to the game, and then come back and take a nap on his floor, and then start it again next day on morning drive. So, and then I later picked up CLTV. And I worked weekends. So I was working 7 days a week. But it was during the Bulls era. So Bulls were hot. It was the story. And so as much as we could do, I was so fortunate to be courtside for all of this. I was at every single championship in some form or fashion, being a part of some coverage. And I'll never forget it. And I thank Lou very much for it. It allowed me to really get into long-form programming. And it allowed me to host championship celebration broadcasts, and that was big. So when they left MAQ, so in the meantime, the Bears were coming to MAQ, and I was there with Brian Davis, and Brian and I were, he hosted the post game, our pre and post game. I was there as well, and I was a spotter for Larrabee. And that's how that all started. But, you mentioned about the play-by-play stuff. I was taking my tape recorder and going to U of I. I was going to high schools because there was interest at one point. I started covering Super Bowls, and I'm not going to say who, but there was interest from an NFL team by way of acquaintances. And I'm like, wow, you really want to hear what I mean, I don't have any experience. And then, but I knew I wanted to do it someday. But being a manager and being so involved with the Bulls, I mean, what did I really have time for other than that, right? And I really was a manager for most of my career. And so in 97, that's when the Bears came there. I think I've got it all right. So, yeah, working with Wayne was, same with Neil Funk. I got to give a Neil Funk shout out. I loved Pat Foley, loved the energy. And I didn't know if I was ever going to become play-by-play of anything, but if it was going to be the energy that all those guys brought to the table and the way they talked the game to you. And Wayne was great to me, and I just met so many people within the Bears organization that they saw me work. And so when he left, I was on the committee to find his replacement. A woman by the name of Lorna Gladstone, who recently passed away, had a lot of belief in me, and she had me cutting demos as well. Hey, let me hear how you sound like. And this is just all mock stuff, right? And so they have ultimately hired Gary Bender for 2 years. He stayed there. And then my boss at the time, Rod Zimmerman, came to me or on a text message at the 2000, was it 2000? Yeah, 2000 Super Bowl. Tampa? It was Baltimore and I'm losing memory now who played
Baltimore, New York?
Yeah, Baltimore and the Giants. Yeah, because Kerry Collins was the quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, meet me at halftime. Let's have a beer. And I figured he was, had few too many when he brings up, the idea of me potentially being interested in being the play-by-play announcer for the Chicago Bears. I'm like, Rod, maybe when you stop enjoying an adult beverage, we can have a conversation. But it was real. And so they had a search, and I had a demo. And my demo included, as it turns out, in a miracle, I was working at WBBM now because they moved the game to WBBM, and I was going to do the Northern Illinois Central Michigan game in 2000 just for yucks. And Mike Korsick, the SID there, was going to let me have a booth, and I'd been doing this stuff, at other places. And he called me like late in the day on a Friday. He goes, "Hey, our play-by-play guy, he can't do the game. He's having an issue, health issue." He goes, "Can you actually do the game?" I go, "Oh my God. I mean, yeah, I'll do it, but I mean, I'm not prepared." So I remember I would have never done this now, but I went out to dinner with a scheduled dinner with friends of mine, the Bridgemans, who now live in Texas. And at dinner, I'm memorizing numbers and trying to have a conversation with them, but I'm like getting ready for this game that was an early morning MAC game. I want to say it kicked off at 11 a.m. and I never met the color guy, never knew nothing about the setup, nothing. I had never even been to the Northern Illinois press box for any reason. So I get there and I am nervous as all get out. And I start calling the game, and I'm not familiar with a lot of these players, obviously, but I do know Michael Turner I think he ran for almost 300 yards, if not more. Justin McCarrans from Naperville, he had 4 touchdowns. I think 1 called back, including the punt return. And I feel bad because his father reached out to me when I got the Bears job in 2001, said, "I need a tape of that game that you did of my son, and it's somewhere in a box." I said, and it was bad. I'm not going to lie. The very first touchdown, and my buddies that were listening to the game, they got a kick out of the fact that I was doing the play-by-play of this game that went to Northern Illinois. The first guy I said, some guy just caught a touchdown. Some guy just got a touchdown. NIU up 7-0. I mean, that's how. But as the game went on, I got more comfortable, and it was a 56 to blah, blah, blah. I mean, it was a huge scoring game, so I had some material, and that was partly how I presented myself as a candidate for the Bears coaching job, Bears play-by-play job, that demo tape. And hard to believe that happened that way.
You told some stories already that might fit this, but I always ask my guests for their welcome to the big leagues moment. I mean, think of how many training camps we've been in where a rookie offensive tackle's at the podium and we ask him about that welcome to the big leagues moment when the veteran edge rusher burns him. And I mean, for you, it could be a lot of things. Could be just a wake-up call or just an arrival, just like a realizing, wow, people recognize me, people know me, I'm Jeff Joniak. When you think of welcome to big leagues moment, is there an anecdote that comes to mind?
Well, I think it was shocked that I got the job, so I'm certain I wasn't anybody's guess to be the next voice of the charter franchise of the National Football League. And
I'm just going to
believe
cut
me,
you off, Jeff, for one moment, because you actually told, or at least this was the way Ed Sherman wrote it in 2001. You told him you thought your chances were 500 to 1. So,
maybe worse than that. Yeah, I mean, I had a lot of things going for me in terms of just my work ethic, and people in the building trusted me in both the buildings, the Palace Hall and at WBBM. And then my relationship with Tom Thayer and Hub Arkish in the booth at that time. And as you know, I mean, I'm a grinder, I'm a worker, so there was never going to be anything different than that. But I realize it's a skill, it's a talent, and you got to harness that and polish it up and make it last and make it good. And so I think my moment was the first game I did was against the Cincinnati Bengals, preseason game before Soldier Field was remade, and opening kickoff, I had a tear in my eye. There's no way I could not. I mean, I remember my wife at the time was sitting a few rows underneath the press box. Brian McCaskey had gotten her tickets, and she looked up at me, and I looked down at her. The first thing, just tears in my eyes, opening kickoff. But the next morning, this is my welcome to the big leagues, okay? Next morning, Steve Olkin, good friend of mine from WMAQ, was hosting a talk show, and he asked me to be on and talk about the game. So sure, we'll talk about the game. And we don't talk about the game, really. He invites the callers to give me a grade on my first game.
oh no.
And I'm instant. I mean, I'm on the phone like, oh, this is going to be a colossal disaster. And, bring back Larrabee, da-da-da, you suck, da-da-da. And, I mean, I somehow managed to navigate that, and I called Steve. I said, Steve, what did you think was going to happen? Oh my God, I go, I mean, I was not angry with him. He was just trying to do me a solid in the big picture, but this is the Bears. This is play-by-play in Chicago. And then there was a writer from the Herald, I think, his name was Ted Cox, shredded me as well in the paper. I mean, I didn't even get my feet off the ground. And I remember going to work at BBM the next Monday or whatever, and they took all the newspapers away. And I remember one of the news anchors, well, it's Pat Cassidy, a close friend, Pat Cassidy goes, hey, don't read the papers today. And I read it, and I was just livid. I was livid. But hey, that was my big league moment, because I realized, hey, Pat told me that this quote, the higher you monkey climbs up the tree, more his ass is exposed. And that is true. And I had to, have thick skin, man. I mean, it is what it is. And it continues to this day. I mean, not everyone's going to like how you do it. You just got to trust in yourself, and, it's even more so. That was before internet. So can you imagine? But I managed to garner a few fans along the way here. So,
All right, we'll wrap
I
up
mean,
with the
there's so
final.
many
Yes.
stories that I can't get into them all.
We could do a part 2 one day.
No.
I'll wrap up with the final 2 questions I also ask everybody. You talked about your grinder, and I see it firsthand. I mean, there's nobody on the planet who prepares the way you do, the research and just the care and passion that you put into making sure that you are ready for every broadcast. And my question is, what's the through line? If you think about Jeff Joniak at Sports Phone in the 80s, or your first job, to today, Jeff Joniak getting ready. We're talking a few days before one of the biggest Bears-Packers games in recent memory. Whenever this airs, the Bears are still going to be very much in the conversation. What is that through line from the things you learned when you first started that still matter today as you get ready for each broadcast?
Hey, success is where preparation meets opportunity. And I know there's very varying definitions of what success is, but you can't be successful without the prep You can't be using the prep without the opportunity. So I'm grateful for the opportunities I was given, and I would hope to say earned, because nothing was ever given to me. I had to earn it all. And I just did it one way, all gas, no brakes. And I sacrificed a ton, as we all do. And from anything from health to relationships to friends, because this is not a part-time journey in sports. And even so, even more so now, I mean, it's a hard business. I mean, we all have witnessed it and experienced it in some form or fashion. Everybody wants to do it. Not everybody wants to go through it or put in the investment that I believe is necessary to be great. And I'm not there yet. I still never feel satisfied. And if I do, I want to quit because, but that's not me. I'm not a quitter. And I think if you like what I do as a listener, and you feel like I've come into your life in a very, it's an intimate medium because you're in cars, you're in, especially in the old days with transistor radios and whatnot. I still get people telling me they listen to the game on a transistor radio and they love that at the game, delay and all. And if you're old enough to remember transistor radios and you love sports, you had one under your pillow and you're listening to all the great announcers of the game. And I have a great respect for the craft. Again, not everyone is equipped to do it. Everybody can try to do it. And not everybody's going to be great at it. We all close our eyes and hear the voices of our life, of our childhood, and those are the greats. They're great based on how you view it, And I'm just blown away, humbled, flattered, amazed that I've been on this journey in this town, never left this town, being a sportscaster all 40 years. That's amazing because while the Bears have had rocky moments in my 25 years and the 29 I've been a part of the organization in some form or fashion, I mean, the people I've met, the relationships in the building, the relationships from the first month of my job to the last week, I've met so many people in football, and I love this sport with a great deal of zeal and zest and passion. And I think when you listen to my broadcasts, our broadcasts, you know it. It's coming from a certain place. And I'm blessed to be with the same group of guys. Tom Thayer took me from not knowing a thing about football when you really get down to it to knowing how to watch tape and understand what it means, to the Zerang family. The late Paul Zerang was our engineer, Mark Zerang, our engineer. Late Mark Zerang was our engineer first with me. We get in the battles. We're both hot-tempered, but he had my best interest at heart all the time. Tried to save my hearing. I like things loud, and he's always turning it down without me knowing, protecting my ears, which I have permanent ringing in the ears from. And then Paul Zerang and his brother Little Z, as you know. Doug Coletti, the greatest statistician on the planet and our right-hand man. He's taught me a lot. The booth has been amazing. Anybody that's worked in it, Zach Zabman, Jason McKee, Mark Rohde, all the producers, all the people involved with the two stations I've worked for, MAQ or BBM and ESPN. So it's been unbelievable. And again, you can't do it. You can't do the broadcast by yourself. It's got to be everybody. And I just happen to be the point guard.
I'm actually going to skip the last question because I ask everybody for their advice, and I feel like you just gave some really good advice. Unless you got something else you want to throw in there, but I think the work and the opportunity, I think that should be the key takeaway. And I like to end on that from you, Jeff. And hey, I know that you keep week after week you kept asking me, when are you going to have me on? When are you going to have me on? We finally made it happen. And
I wasn't asking, but
and
listen, I
yeah.
appreciate this. Talking about myself is not something that I love doing, but you can tell I get excited about the journey. It's been pretty amazing, and even being able to do the Cubs for a couple games. I mean, that's those are things I'm never going to forget.
It's a great journey, and there's a lot of people, as you said, who, I mean, to be the voice of the Bears for a day, let alone
Right.
25 seasons and going, it's pretty remarkable. And not to age you, Jeff, but it's always very fun because I grew up listening to you, and now I get to be at Hallis
Yeah,
Hall
but
with
you
you
know,
every
you're a
day.
colleague. You can't be that young.
I
You're
know.
a colleague.
I'm old enough that I remember sneaking a transistor radio to a weekend getaway with a school and listening to the World Series on that transistor radio.
Oh yeah.
So
I
I
did
know it.
that. I did that in a classroom in Cleveland for the day Frank Robinson was a player manager for the Cleveland, at the time, Indians. And I had long hair and Mrs. Katzenstein said, "What is that?" And I had the game on. Boy, I got in big trouble.
I won't tell you the game that I was listening to because it was a lot of years later. But Jeff, thank you so much for
Thank you,
joining the
Kevin.
program and telling our listeners how you broke in.
Appreciate it. Thank you for having me.